Welcome to another episode of Digital Diary. And today we're going to be talking about pattern alteration. And that's changing a pattern a bit. Like many of you, I did a lot of garment sewing. So pattern alteration was tweaking the pattern that you had to fit. And it used to be fit a body, but now it's going to be to fit a space or piecing. So I'd like to start off by asking my fellow educators here, how do you change patterns or alter them in your daily quilting? Karen, I'm sure you do a lot of this. What do you think?
Yeah, I do. So obviously I design my own patterns from scratch, but I am constantly changing patterns as well. Patterns that I've created or other people have created to tweak them for quilts. And I'm sure we'll talk more about, what purposes. But my biggest thing that I probably do is I will take an element out of an edge to edge pattern and plug in a different element to customize an edge to edge design. It's just fun.
Yep, I like that one too. How about you, DeAnn?
Wow. I change something on every single quilt, I think. Even if it's an edge to edge, I think I just adjust it to be unique to that quilt. One of the things I use the most is probably borders and adjusting them, to fit maybe a non-border area, or shaking it up and putting several in together.
How about you, Christine?
Well, I typically use a lot of very simple patterns. And the reason I choose simple patterns is because I like to use them in interesting ways. So when I modify patterns, I actually take patterns and use other features with them. So I'll take, an edge to edge or a border pattern and use it with a ply to stretch it out, or use it with a patterned boundary and squish it into an interesting shape. So I don't necessarily pull things out and put things in. I take fairly simple patterns and do interesting things with them. So I start simple and work up.
Well, that's altering the pattern. I think that works. I love altering designs to use for semi-custom quilting. I'm going to show you some examples of that, but I'd say what I probably do most every day is similar to what DeAnn does. I am changing up my edge to edge designs. I like to flip every other row, and so I'm constantly re-nesting them, or I will make them less dense because I want to make that pattern a little bit smaller but not have as much quilting. Another thing that I do is to resize, and that is an easy way to start off if you haven't done any pattern alterations. For instance, a piano key. If you have a piano key pattern that is at a 1/2 inch, and let's say it's a border one, and you've got a border segment to go with it, it's really easy to put both of those on the screen and size them together, like say to a 1/4 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch, and then save each pattern individually. So simply by resizing, you are altering that pattern. Karen, why don't you show us some of the things that you like to do?
Okay, I'll share my screen. So this is obviously just a shot from Creative Studio. And what I like about altering patterns and customizing designs, one of the things I really like is that it works not just for Statler owners, but for Elevate owners. So whatever your computerized machine type, you can create these patterns and then take them to the machine that you have. So this is one that you might have seen before because I do this a lot with this pattern. This is one of my original designs, Fairy Princess right here. And I just plug in a name or do some other little thing to customize that design for the quilt that I'm putting on. And I tell you, the customers just absolutely eat that up. They love it to death.
Oh, anytime you can add a name or personalize things, I think that's a great thing.
I've got one more example here. And obviously these are all edge-to-edge designs because that's mostly what my customers want. My quilting customers, I do a lot of edge-to-edge. And just because it's edge-to-edge doesn't mean you can't make it personalized or custom or make sure that you get a result that matches that quilt and matches that customer. So just very similar example. I've got this pattern that's an original. It's just a batik kind of design, and the customer will come and say, "Oh, I love it, but can you put hearts in it?" And I say, "Yes, I can." So you just take one element out of the design and put something else in there. And then the next customer comes and has batik elephants on their fabric, and they want an elephant on their pattern. And you say, "I can do that too." And you just pull one element out and put something else in there. And with edge-to-edge designs, if you don't change the start and end and just plug other, pull other elements out, you still have a repeatable pattern that should work perfectly in edge-to-edge mode, either Elevate or Statler.
I love this example. I particularly love how you've changed out the element, yet made it still the style of the quilting pattern with that double line in there. Great example. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I have some designs from Christine and DeAnn.
This is just this simple thing that I do on a regular basis, and that is either changing from block design to an edge to edge by simply adding a couple curves, or taking those curves away to make an edge to edge into a block. And it's most of the time very easy to do.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love how the line comes through the center here, and it really makes that thing spin.
Mhm.
Okay, we'll go to the next one.
And here's one of those that I kind of suggested earlier, is that where I take an edge-to-edge pattern, especially one that can be brought down into a border, and that's what I was using this one for, but it didn't have a corner, obviously. So I placed one going up and one going over, and then I simply took out the pieces that I wanted, which were the boots and the hats, and then replaced the loops and made sure that it connected at the corner. And it probably could have used a bit more time, but it worked real well on some fabric that you wouldn't see it a lot, but you know it's there.
That's a great one.
I think that's so cool. And like these last two examples, you made patterns so much more useful by making some changes or adapting them. That's really cool.
And these are all things that are taught on the Quilting with Confidence tour, in a lot of different ways, depending on which year of the tour that you wanted to purchase the classes, but check them out on the Gamma website.
Okay, let's take a look at what Christine has. And let's see if I can move us out of the way. Tell us about this one.
So this is one of those quilts where, like I said, I typically take a pattern and not necessarily pull things out or put things in, but I take a pattern and make it fit a different scenario. So in this case, this quilt required these big, giant diamond patterns in between all of that piecing. And so I decided it kind of had that bohemian vibe. And as long as I chose some patterns that were kind of had that hand-drawn aesthetic already, if I went and used pattern to boundary to squish them into diamond patterns, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's what I'm doing if that's all you see. So I literally just drew a diamond that fit out the shape on the quilt and did pattern to boundary to fit these big patterns, because those are really big, and squish them into those diamond shapes. the straight line patterns, I did the same thing with that too, but that's my simple pattern squished into a shape. But
So is that just a piano key border corner?
nope, it's kind of like a kind of a log cabin kind of block where it goes and gets more dense towards one side.
Ah, okay, I do see that.
So it's one of those things like with the diamonds, with the log cabin kind of diamonds, that I actually had to use that orient baseline when I was putting in those patterns so that I could get the pattern to squish in the right direction.
Very interesting how these guys look so different. I mean, I can go over and see what they were and then what they got squished into. Pattern to boundary really gives some very interesting results.
Well, and I was just being very careful as to which patterns I picked. And a lot of times when you're doing that technique, patterns that have more nodes typically work better than patterns with fewer nodes.
Oh, that's a good tip. Good
Yep.
tip to know. Let's take a look at another one of Christine's. I love this.
So this is actually a technique that I teach in one of my classes. This is in my simple clicks class. This is a pattern that I actually sell as a full, complete, like repeatable edge to edge called dimensional wobble. But I created this by creating all of these odd shaped looking boundaries that interlock and then doing pattern to boundary multiple times. And so because these patterns are built as point to point patterns and I'm doing pattern to boundary and the boundaries touch, I can basically link up a whole entire row of these patterns, even though they're squished and out of shape and they're not going straight across the quilt. I just have to make sure that they're in my throat space. So it's one of the reasons why having a really big throat space works really well for me. I might not be using it all the time, but it gives me more area to lay out giant patterns like this.
This is just a very kind of quirky way to use pattern to boundary. Most of us use it in a straight block, but this program will do just about anything. And this is where you could take something like this over to your Elevate as well.
Absolutely.
Once you had the design. Okay, this is one of mine. And on this particular quilt, I have two sizes of border. One border is a little wider than the other. And I wanted the feathers to remain consistent throughout the quilt. So what I did was I just lengthened the piano key that came underneath. And that was really easy to do. I just made the piano key fit my grid, and then I used the nodes and brought them down with snap-on. So very easy to do. So I didn't have to worry about the fact that I had two size borders. I just used the same pattern and lengthened it, but only lengthened a portion of it.
That's a great solution because I run into that too, where the border sizes are different and you have to decide what type of pattern to put in there. So that's kind of fantastic.
Oh, and it's really so easy to do. I mean, very easy. So I'll show you another one that I do probably a lot next to the edge to edge designs. And that is, I'm looking for a triangle. I want to fit a triangle into a design using draw pattern. And on this particular quilt, it happens to be the one behind me, where I'm going to see the design is just in the white. So I want to make sure my design is going to be showing up in the white, and I want to be able to click on the corners of this block. So what I usually do is I make a blueprint of the block so that I get a really good idea of where the piecing is, and I can tell where I want to alter the pattern. Now, the pattern I'm using is one of Karen's. And I'm sure that's on the cloud and also on Wildflower Quilting, one of her website. And this is the block. And I rotated it, and then I turned it into a boundary and put my pattern over it. And then I took away half of the pattern, and I needed to change it. So I moved these little balls, made them smaller, and moved them down. And when I need to change just a portion of the pattern, that's where the nodes come in. And I did add an extra piece into the centers because it was getting kind of big there. And this is the point-to-point design that I ended up with. And it really looks so much like what I had up here with the small alterations of these balls. And I've added this. I changed the size of both of these. And so that's how it looked on my blueprint. I was able.
Did you move those balls down so it fits your piecing a little bit better?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
The balls that I changed, they were much larger. I moved them down so that they would fit in these triangles here. And I also, the other place where I made them smaller was here, where you can see it would have come up over the piecing. And here's my end result. And I was able to still click on the seam intersections of the block, and the majority of what I like to see fell into the white space. I also liked the fact that I had this reoccurring almost clover shape that kept coming about on the quilt itself. So that was a little bit more work, but I used the same pattern. I just changed a few elements.
That's pretty cool. And that pattern actually is one of the free designs in the free patterns from Gamel.
Better yet.
So everybody has that one.
Yeah, it's a great design. I loved the fact that I could put the circles, and more circles. So that's just one way that I use altering patterns. I change up point-to-point designs so that I can use semi-custom quilting. Does anybody have any other things that they will use routinely, like making a 90-degree triangle into a taller, thinner one? That sometimes works.
I have to agree. I can't remember who said at the beginning that they alter patterns basically for every single quilt. And I think that's true for me too. I might not be creating like a brand new design with a custom name in it, but I'm going to be moving something so that it nests better, or I'm going to be moving endpoints so that the edge to edge works better, or turning those block patterns into point to points. It's just so useful to be able to know how to alter patterns.
I agree. I think the ability to use Creative Studio and to be comfortable with it is got to be something that you invest the time in, because it's really going to benefit you later on. And that goes for the Elevate as well as Statler quilters.
And I'm glad, I think both Christine and DeAnn mentioned classes that are on the Gamma website, because a lot of the classes on there talk about this very topic, about just, creating patterns or altering patterns.
Yeah, there's some rules to follow when you're trying to create a point-to-point, and it never hurts to be reminded, or the classes also give you inspiration. And that's what we were hoping to do today. We've seen a lot of ways to change the patterns that we have. There are so many pattern designers out there. And so I'd like to hear from you, Karen, what you think about altering the patterns that we buy.
Oh, I'm glad you asked, because copyright issues are a big deal to me as a designer, and I know all of us pay special attention to that. So basically, the rule is if you don't know a designer's wishes, you should leave the pattern alone. But most designers are going to be really happy for you to use the patterns that you have in any way that works on your personal quilts or your customer quilts. They want you to adapt those patterns, use the patterns, change the patterns. I know that's true for me as a designer, but if you're not sure, contact the designer. Most of them have information on their websites about their copyright rules or their contact information. So it's important to remember that if you alter a pattern, even for your own personal use, you can't sell it or share it, right? If you derived that design from somebody else's work, you can't share it, you can't sell it. Most designers are fine with you using it on your own projects, though.
So thank you for joining us on this latest episode of Digital Diary, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you. Bye.